Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Welcome to our worship. It's a great night to be gathered together. Tomorrow night, not so great, probably. No? Fire's going to be talking about that. We have our first, our Lenten speaker tonight. And I'll introduce her after the prayers. But, I'll introduce her after the prayers. Would you please rise? Hear my prayer, O Lord.
Listen to my cry.
Keep me as the apple of your eye.
Hide me in the shadow of your wings.
In righteousness I shall see you.
When I awake, your presence will give me joy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, the hours of both day and night are yours, and to you darkness is no threat. Be present, we pray, with those who labor in these hours of night, especially those who watch and work on behalf of others. Grant them diligence in their watching, faithfulness in their service, courage in danger, and competence in emergencies. Help them to meet the needs of others with confidence and compassion. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You can be seated. So, for 2 weeks in February?
I'm gone so much, she doesn't know.
For 2 weeks in February, 10 days in February, I got to watch all the zombie movies I wanted to. And I got to watch all of the Mission Impossible movies, and then waiting eagerly for Bishop to call me. Our first speaker is Bishop Joy Mortensen-Wiebe. I've known her for 34 years. We've been married 32.
I'll just take over.
So, at our first church, we were each half-time. We were the associate pastor together. And somebody in the call committee asked, well, what are your hopes and dreams for each other? And I said, for her to be the first female bishop in the ELCA. Well, there's been quite a few bishops in the ELCA, female bishops in the ELCA. But my favorite one is Bishop Joy Mortensen.
He said it would just take over because I was gone 14 days in January. 14 days I was gone in January, not 10. And do you remember I was gone last week too? Yep. I was gone last week too. I'm gone a lot, so he gets to watch a lot of zombie movies. When we load Netflix at home now, I'm like... Anyways, thank you for the invitation to be with you tonight. It's a delight to be here because I'm actually a member here, and I never get to join with you in worship, so thank you for that invitation. Let's begin in prayer. Good and gracious God, thank you so much for gathering us in this evening, for gathering us in a place of conversation and learning and worship. We do indeed pray for those who are not able to be together physically with us tonight, but who join us online. We give you thanks for their presence. And we remember those in our lives who are sick or unable to join, but we give thanks for their presence in our lives and ask that your Spirit would surround them as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I'm going to tell you about my ELCJHL trip, which stands for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. So since about 2015, Bishop Azar, who's the bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, has been inviting mostly newly elected bishops to come to the Holy Land to learn about the Palestinian people who live in the Holy Land, in Palestine, and to also learn about the church in Jordan. And of course, the pandemic had something to do with the fact that these are not all the newly elected bishops. These are bishops who were elected in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So this trip was very different than recent trips because generally every year there's about anywhere from 2 to maybe like 13 bishops who are elected. This contingency of bishops that went to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, there were 17 of us, and we represented about a third of the Conference of Bishops. There are 65 bishops in the ELCA, and so this group was a very sizable group that journeyed to the Holy Land at the invitation of Bishop Azar. And that's going to be important for you to know in just a little bit as I proceed through my time with you today. So this is our whole group. We also were joined by other folks who kind of came and went from our trip, including advocacy staff from our Washington office, Lutheran Office of Public Policy. We had a woman with us who's in charge of women of the ELCA on behalf of our church. We also had folks who are our mission staff who live and work in the Holy Land on behalf of our church. You'll also notice in this picture, our presiding bishop is present in this picture, Liz Eaton. She was with us for about 48 hours, give or take an hour, of our trip. And I'll also tell you why she was with us as we proceed. Here's just another shot of that. Bishop Azar is next to presiding Bishop Eaton there, kind of in the center. So he's the bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. So our invitation was to come and see. And the question is, what are you looking for? Jesus asked the disciples who are following him on his way. And what we were posed with is we recognize God not only with the ancient stones of the past, but in God's presence in the present, in the place of the cross, and in places of the resurrection. So we were really invited on this trip to come and see, but not to experience just a place that most tourism sites. So we were invited to come and talk to people, talk to the living stones, and get to know the stories of the Palestinian people. So the first part of our trip, we focused on land and identity. So land is very much a part of the identity of the Palestinian people. Many of them are rooted to the land and have been rooted in the land for a very long time. We heard often of the deep connection of the people to the land. We toured and heard stories of the people who have had land taken and who have been sent away from their land. We also experienced the ways in which Israel is dividing up the land and building settlements and checkpoints to separate families from one another and people from their land. So we were experienced and exposed to a lot of places where people said, this land has been in my family for generations and generations. In this slide, you can see it's overlooking the hills of Palestine, and it's looking out at some olive trees, and in the great distance, which you can kind of make out here, is some settlements, Israeli settlements. Israeli settlements are considered illegal by most of the international community, but Israel is building more and more settlements. So ways in which we experienced getting to know the land and its people. So the Palestinians, as we experienced them, are a pretty resilient people. They're a pretty hopeful people. We went to this place called the Environmental Education Center. It's funded in part by the Swedish Lutheran Church and also the Lutheran World Federation, as well as monies that come through the ELCA, through the Lutheran World Federation. And this is a place that was pretty remarkable to experience. It's a place where Palestinian children come to experience the land because much of Palestine, there are no green spaces for school children to really experience outdoor play. The schools that we visited, they had some concrete playgrounds, but very little green space. They also had very little place for birds. There are very few birds in Palestine anymore. So this environmental education center is a place where birds that are migrating away from colder climates and then back again can actually come and be cared for and find a place to shelter when they're migrating to and fro. So I didn't have time to put this slide in, but there was a man that we met who captured a bird right out of the air for us and explained to us what sort of bird this was from Germany. But that's the kind of work they do there for Palestinian children who really never get to hear birds or see birds or be out in green spaces. They've also built, as you see in this picture, some swinging bridges and some places for school children to climb and just experience nature. As I was walking through that place with our group, I was thinking how fortunate we are, right, to live where we live and to have the freedoms we live. But these Palestinian children at least have this place that on occasion they're able to come to. They also run a summer camp so that Palestinian children are able to come if they can get a permit to come, and if they're allowed to come, if they have the right permit to come and learn. This woman is one of the educators at the Environmental Education Center. She's a mother of 4 children, but she's very passionate about working at this place. In this photo, she's telling us about olive trees and pistachio trees, but she is so passionate about her work, she has to cross 3 checkpoints every day to get to work. And so when she crosses through checkpoints in Israel are not fun places for Palestinians to cross. She was telling us how she's often harassed, so often made to get out of her car and be searched. Bodily searched in her car is often searched. If you're Palestinian, your car has a different license plate than if you're Israeli, and you have to carry certain identification papers. But she has to go through 3 checkpoints. Mileage-wise, it's actually pretty close for her to get to her work, but because of the number of checkpoints that she has to go to, because she has that certain driver's license or driver's plate, license plate, it takes her a very long time to get there. But because of her passion and because this is really where she feels called to work, this is where she works. And she's got 4 pretty young children. So just an example for you of really her passion and their passion to continue to connect children and generations to the land. We also heard some really painful stories about connection to the land. In this photo, we were at a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It's a pretty famous neighborhood. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's Shak neighborhood. This is a very disputed neighborhood. The gentleman in maroon is a person who represents the World Council of Churches. Much of our itinerary for this trip, we did not know we were doing. It was kept secret, so Darren and my family had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. This is one of the examples of an itinerary agenda item that we didn't know we were doing. And that was, we didn't know why that was. I thought it was to protect us. It was not to protect us. It was to protect people like these gentlemen in this picture. All of them. The World Council of Church Workers. He works in this neighborhood. There are regularly skirmishes in this neighborhood with Israeli soldiers and the residents of this neighborhood. This land has been in dispute since 1947. In 1972, the gentleman in the hat, I'll show you the next picture. The gentleman with the hat, the gentleman who's bowed down, and the other gentleman, taller gentleman standing next to him. Those 3 gentlemen and their families are of the 4 that have been fighting since at least 1972 for Israel to recognize that they own the land that their homes are on. They're lucky because those 3 families have paperwork that dates back to the Ottoman regime, so the 1800s, indicating that they do own the land. It's been tied up in the courts. They're lucky. because the house right next to that tree, that family, a few months ago, Israel came and kicked them out and moved settlers into the home. And that family lived under the fig tree that's right next to the gentleman in the scarf. They lived under the fig tree in protest to having been kicked out. The gentleman with the beret hat on, his house is right behind this fence. And he described to us that when his son was growing up, he built an addition onto the house. He first tried with the government in Israel, in Jerusalem, to get the appropriate construction permits. Israel wouldn't give him permits. He tried for a long time. He finally built this addition and still didn't hear back from Israel. It's very hard to get permits to build. Finally, one day, the government, the mayor or someone in Jerusalem came, put a lock on it and said, put a lock on the door of this new addition and said, "We're sorry, you can't live here anymore." And then the next day, an Israeli settler family moved in. So now every day when he walks around this corner into his house, this new addition that he had hoped was for his son and his family is now occupied by an Israeli family. And we saw the man driving up and down, waiting for us to finish our conversation, and right in the same little area, his house. So it's an example of like how painful it is to experience land and property that you have had in your family for years, and what these conflicts are like for some of these very real living people to be expressing. So just a little more on land, and then I'll shift a bit. This was on our very first day, looking over actually one of the tourist areas, the Potter's Field. You can see that whole long line. That's all wall that's being built. So that's just an example of kind of an aerial view. But there are more and more walls going up to separate people. And these walls, I mean, graffiti is everywhere. And the Palestinians are getting they probably always have been, quite creative in their protest around the walls. So here's just a few examples of some of the things that are written kind of in protest. These walls are up to 30 feet high in many places. They're not low fence kind of structures. They're very high. So here's some that we saw. This one was interesting. This painting goes all the way up, those animals standing on top of each other. So hope for the future is kind of our next segue. But the whole emphasis on being tied to the land and having your land be more and more taken away. There are 540 checkpoints in that very small country right now. Part of the idea is the more and more you segment people away from each other, the more and more control you have over them. One last story of the land. When we were at another site called Tent of Nations, we were leaving, we had to walk a ways to our bus. We met a farmer, and he asked where we were from and was thankful that we were coming and seeing. And he said, I'm thankful that you are coming and seeing, but please go and tell. Israel put up a wall, and now I cannot even get to my tractor. So he has to farm his field. His tractor's on the other side of the wall. He can no longer get to his tractor. And this was not a young man. This was a man probably, if I could guess, in his 70s, who now has to farm without the convenience of his tractor. So he has to and he's got olive trees to tend to. He cannot use his tractor. So it's not a good situation. As our trip progressed, we moved into looking at what kind of hope is there for the future. And we started with this sort of thought from Dr. Muther Isaac. My prayer for the church in Palestine and around the world is that God moves our inner spirits to cry and lament the things that are wrong and broken in our communities, nations, and even in our churches. And so today we lament in hope, because we believe in the God of resurrection and hope. So we visited a number of schools both in Ramallah and in Bethlehem. We visited some elementary schools, we visited a vocational school, and I have a couple of pictures to show you. Palestinians are some of the most educated, some of the most educated population for sure in the Middle East, if not in the greater part of the world. And they have excellent educations. Your ELCA mission support supports a lot of that education. We send money and we support some of those vocational schools. We met a lot of the children. This little one stole my heart just with her eyes. I have a lot of pictures of children. I could have probably spent the whole time just talking about the children, but that'll be next time I come. Many of them learn multiple language, with English being a very common language. Also German is one that they learn in many of these schools. But we found many classes being taught. This class in particular, I don't know if you can tell from the hand movements, but they sing to us Baby Shark. Baby Shark. Yeah, that one. And they were very happy and proud of themselves for singing Baby Shark to us. And super precious. I think I might even have a video of that. So this was the School of Hope in Beit Jala. Again, they take great pride in their school system, and we're a part of helping to educate in many of these schools. This was a vocational school when Bishop Eaton happened to be alongside of us. At this vocational school, we toured through many parts of it. This is a Lutheran World Federation school-supported training center. This was highly unusual as a vocational center because many girls were enrolled, both Muslim and Christian, more Muslim than Christian. That's reflective of the population. And the female students who were enrolled in this graphic design class designed, you can see it in the back, they designed a graphic of Bishop Eaton, and they made the graphic, cut it out, and put it on mugs for both Bishop Eaton and her husband to take home. So she's standing in front of the graphic of herself. So we also toured in that vocational school places where they were doing woodworking and repairing of cars. Unemployment in Palestine is quite high. It's a very small country and there's a lot of people. And so doing either higher education through many of these private schools and also vocational schools is a ticket, as it is in our country as well, right? Education helps you to be able to advance yourself and secure jobs. So there's a lot of in this school vocational training for girls in particular in order to be able to succeed. So be who God meant you to be and you will set the world on fire. So I think that was a really appropriate quote for thinking through, you know, the resilience and the hope that exists in Palestine despite the many difficult realities of everyday life there. One of the things that we did do while we were there, and many thought perhaps it was the reason we were going to Palestine, while we were there, Sally Azar became the first female ordained in the Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. And we were fortunate enough to be there for that. And I gotta say, it was a really remarkable day. So I have a few pictures to show you of what that event was like. It was momentous to have a female ordained into that church. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land was the first church to adopt the Lutheran World Federation's gender justice statement, and for Sally to be ordained into a primarily Muslim area of the world is huge. So it was a very momentous day. Outside of her ordination in the Old City, we were greeted by a very, very outstanding band. This is like the equivalent of the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts in our country. Some of you may have seen this online. It was amazing. And what was really amazing to me is that all of us who were there dressed in our full garbs, we became the subject of pictures of tourists. Instead of being the tourists, suddenly we were the ones that everyone was taking a picture of because they couldn't quite figure out what was going on. There were about 300 people, bishops and others who came from around the world to attend this ordination. So this is Sally, that's Sally, and then Gabby Al-Looney, who's the Africa and Middle East desk person for the ELCA. He lives in Bethlehem. But this is a sampling of just what an amazing event this was, from people all over the world coming to be at this ordination. What was striking, however, was that even as we gathered for this ordination, many of Sally's own parishioners could not attend the event because Israel did not give them permits to come, so they could not travel. And so they were left to watch it on the live stream that was provided, including, we were staying at a guest house in Bet-Jela. Our innkeeper, she was not able to come, and she's a member of Sally's church. So we were able to leave, travel to the ordination, celebrate and have a magnificent time, but she could not attend. So the privilege that we had from being able to just fly in from all over the whole world and attend was pretty significant. I threw this one in because we were in the very farthest corner of the entire church, the very, very, very back corner of a very large church, and we took plenty of time to screw around because it took a long time to get started. We had to be in our chairs like an hour and a half early, so we had a lot of time for photos and screwing around. So we did. All right, checking my time quick. And this was just another photo of our having a little fun, because we did. Just some colleague bishops along the way. All right, now the most important part of my talk. As I told you at the beginning, this was an unusual trip because there were so many of us. And because there were so many of us, we also had the chance to do some things that a smaller group of bishops would not get to do. So the final sort of section of our trip and my talk with you tonight is entitled Go and Tell. The church is not a group of people who all believe the same things. The church is a group of people caught up in the same story, with Jesus at the center. So, we had a visit to the Palestinian Prime Minister. His name is Minister Mohammed, and I can never say his last name, so say it in your head. So, this sounds perhaps like the Prime Minister of Palestine. We didn't know that this was on our agenda, but, hey, tomorrow you're going to go visit the Prime Minister. Okay. And at first, when we were prepping for this meeting, it sounded like, this was a person who has a lot of power. But we learned rather quickly in our time with him, and he was very generous with his time with us. We learned that because of the occupation of Israel, he really doesn't have as much power as you would think. One of our main concerns in talking with him was to ask him to get the funding for August Victoria Hospital caught up. So August Victoria Hospital is one of the 4 hospitals in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, and the Lutheran World Federation, and again, this is money that you also, when you give mission support, we pass it on and it goes out into the world. Lutheran World Federation supports this hospital. It is a hospital that provides care for diabetics, gives chemotherapy, and provides a lot of screening for breast cancer and other cancers of women. So it's a vitally important hospital. And the Palestinians are behind on their payment. And so what we said is, look, this is an important hospital, and we're asking, please, could you catch up on your payments? And so he heard us, but he also has said that the Israelis are behind on their payments. So he heard our ask, I think, and he listened well. And just so you know, President Biden has promised another $100 billion between the 4 hospitals in East Jerusalem. So that's good news. The problem is getting Israel to release the money to the Palestinian Authority so it can get passed on. But we did make the Palestinian Prime Minister aware that we know that this is an important hospital for the care of Palestinians and that we support it. That we know that we do schools well through the Lutheran World Federation and that we do this hospital really, really well, and it's vital to the health of Palestine. And so this is in the middle, the Prime Minister and Bishop Azar, and then the pastor who's in Ramallah. We also had a visit to the U.S. Embassy, which again, hey, the next day we're going to the U.S. Embassy, everyone. So we lived in our clerical collars because we didn't know what we were doing from day to day. But this also was a very important visit for us to make. George Knoll is the Assistant Chief of Mission and head of the Palestinian Affairs Unit. His staff person, Sarah, is really the reason we got through his door, I think, because she's a St. Olaf grad. So we're pretty sure that's how we got through the door. So this was a fascinating visit. He also was very generous with his time. He, I think, shared our frustrations in the situation in Palestine, and also more or less told us we don't know the half of it. Because he then told us a story about how difficult it is to do anything with Israel. He's been trying, this is how tiny successes he tries to celebrate. He's been trying to get carpet into a mosque in Palestine for months, but Israel won't allow it into the country. So this mosque has like super dirty, disgusting carpeting. They want to have it replaced, and the U.S. Embassy is trying to help this carpeting get into this mosque. So that's the level at which our U.S. Embassy is trying to help things get accomplished. Sarah, his assistant, did tell us of one really good development, I think, and that is that the U.S. has just changed a policy, updated a policy really. If you were caught stone throwing, right, you hear of stone throwing on the news, if you were caught stone throwing, that would go on your record, even if you were 12 or 14, which most of the stone throwers are younger children. If you were caught stone throwing, that would show up on your travel papers as you being a terrorist. So the U.S. now has changed its policy that it changes that designation from a terrorist designation on your travel papers to a stone thrower. So that's good, because otherwise you would never, ever be able to come into our country and others. So that's a development. One other thing that we asked, and this is a big ask that we had for the U.S. Embassy, was the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land is not recognized by Israel. That's important, and they've been asking, because what that means with their not being recognized is that any day of Israel's choosing, they can decide that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land is a terrorist group. They did that recently with a church in Sweden. So George Knoll did seem surprised by that and did seem to take note of that. But it is important, it was an important ask for us to make in front of one of our officials. Just to say, hey, did you know? So that felt like we accomplished something. So this is a group of us at the U.S. Embassy, and George Knoll is right there in the center, surrounded by probably more clergy than he ever hoped to see in his life.
You look like you're speaking up.
Yeah, well, I tried to hide in all the group photos, and I did pretty well, but that one I made my appearance a little bit. I was playing Where's Waldo in all the pictures. So, and then our last sort of really big visit, which was also a surprise, we were able to visit the Prince of Jordan, one of the princes of Jordan, and go to a real-life palace. Again, that was never on my bucket list, and we had no idea we were doing that. We visited Prince Ghazi. So Prince Ghazi is a very interesting man. He's the chief advisor to King Abdul for religious and cultural affairs. This man is an incredibly smart man. He has 2 or 3 PhDs, one in Islamic philosophy, one from the University of Cambridge. He went to boarding school when he was like 6. He speaks like 5 or 6 languages. I mean, this is a very, very intelligent man. His main emphasis with us is on how destructive Christian Zionism is. He talked a lot about how we really need to know our faith and teach our faith. And he wasn't saying it in any sort of demeaning way, but more like, you Christians really need to know your faith. Because when you don't know your faith, you can't survive, essentially. Like, your head and your heart, your theology, you need to speak it. Because otherwise somebody's going to say what yours is, right, and claim it. He was also very adamant about, you're born a Muslim, you stay a Muslim. If you're born a Christian, you stay a Christian. And we should not be, evangelizing each other, which makes a lot of sense in that part of the world, and is generally, that's generally a thing in that part of the world, I think. So we thanked him for two specific things that we wanted to thank him for. In particular, as I have up on the slide, it's thought that in the site along the Jordan River is most likely, there's several sites that think this is the case, this is most likely to be the site of where the baptism of Jesus happened. And so with his work, that site has actually been designated as a safe spot, right? So Jordan purchased the land and has protected the land and made that happen. The other thing that we thanked him for is that the country of Jordan is supposed to look over the holy sites in Jerusalem. They are not necessarily, by the latest news that I've read since coming home from my trip, right now Israel's not really letting them go and oversee the holy sites, but Jordan is supposed to. And the most interesting thing that the prince had to say to us about that is that it's really difficult to negotiate with a bully. So even though Jordan is by they internationally have been given the right to oversee the holy sites on behalf of the world, Israel's really kind of preventing them from doing that. And his words to us was, it's really hard to negotiate with the bully. But we thanked him for his work in trying to protect the holy sites that have value to all kinds of people. So I'll show you the next picture. This is actually where the land that Jordan gave to protect this site that is believed to be where the baptism of Jesus happened. The one kind of in the middle there in the back is Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. It's beautiful. They have a pastor. He is like a 2-point parish. This is one of his parishes. It's more like the one that's open for tourists and visiting groups, of which there are many. And then he has an in-town church, which is sort of the regular everyday congregation. But this is actually a very beautiful congregation, and it was built with money that was given a lot from the Church of Sweden, as well as other gifts from, there was a couple of synods across our ELCA who gave money to have this built as well. And then I thought I would just sort of end and let you have some questions. This was just a sunset on the way to Tiberias, which just sort of felt appropriate to give testimony to the hope and the resilience of the Palestinian people, but also felt like it was a good way to just share that, the sun rises and the sun sets all over the world, and we have our challenges and our hopes and dreams. But one of the hopes and dreams of the Palestinian people was that we would return and tell the story. That the best way, they said, is that we can come back and tell some of these stories. So even as the sun sets here, the sun is rising there soon, and they'll begin another day with some of these struggles. So what questions do you have? Amy?
Did you have to go through the checkpoints, and did your group get harassed at all at the checkpoint?
We did. Yes, we did go through checkpoints. We went through many checkpoints because we traveled around quite a bit. The soldiers did board our bus a couple of times, and so when they board the bus, you have to immediately show your passport and have them out. So, yeah, I mean, we did have a couple of Palestinians on our bus, right? Gabby Al-Bouni is Palestinian. Our tour guide was Palestinian, and also our driver. But then, it's a bus full of Americans, so the Israelis are not gonna mess with that. But we did have to, they were fully loaded with all their guns and 3 of them boarding the bus. But yeah, it wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world. Even as we're sitting there all in our full colors, they still have a lot of guns, so, but yes. I felt more unsafe in Israel than in Palestine. Probably because of the presence of all the soldiers. Yeah. A little bit, yes. We met with a Jewish humanitarian group in Israel. So yes, we were in Israel as well as in Palestine. We didn't have time to meet with a lot of Israeli folks because we were only there 2 weeks and we had, all these big events going on. So we did meet with a Jewish humanitarian group, yep, and talked with some of the folks, but not as much. We stayed mostly in Palestine because it was the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, so it's a Palestinian Christian Lutheran church. Mm-hmm.
What new foods did you try?
What new foods did I try? The food was amazing. I thought about putting up just a whole bunch of slides of food, but some people took pictures of every food. Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I didn't get to try a lot of the foods of my counterparts, but some of the foods they tried looked amazing. But let me tell you, the pita bread there, like the fresh pita bread when it's all popped out and fresh, that's a thing. The food I have not stopped thinking about since the day I came back is halva, which is it's a sesame block that's sweetened. You put it on everything or you just eat it. You can also get it as a spread that's kind of between a Nutella texture and a honey texture. So halva, that's the thing that I really want to find somewhere. That is my favorite new thing that I'd never had before. And the feta also there is not really salty. So I could eat a lot of feta there. So those two, feta and halva. Take me back for that.
I guess what's the worst case scenario and the best case scenario for Palestine? What do you see happening?
Yeah, you go there 2 weeks, you're not an expert. There was a lot of conversation about, is the 2-state solution dead? Is there any way forward from that? Yeah, I don't know if there's really an easy answer to that, honestly. I think, when we were there, right, in January, there was a lot of concern that this spring is going to bring not good things at all. And if you're following the news of the Middle East, there's been a lot more shootings, a lot more of all kinds of violence. The news media we read tells the story from the Israeli point of view. If you read other news sources, you can get a more other side, right? If you read the BBC even or some other sources, you get the other side. So I guess the best or the worst depends on what source you're reading, right? That's true of all of it. I think, I don't know how to answer that exactly. It's just it's not a good situation. And I do believe after being there, and seeing with my own eyes and seeing some of the people and just experiencing what those checkpoints look like and how big those walls are and how they're really cutting off a neighbor from a neighbor. They're cutting off people from one another and how that does psychological damage too, right? So if we only hear the one side and we don't ever apprise ourselves of the other side, then how do we know what the solution is either? We're only hearing the one side. So I think a best case scenario for us in the US would be to learn more of both sides.
So are there ever times during unrest that the church in Palestine provides a physical refuge or just curious of that?
Well, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Jordan and the Holy Land is quite small. So Christians make up about 4% of the population right now in Palestine, well, really all of that country. And many of them are living in exile, right? So many of them live in the United States and other countries. They've been in exile, they've left. And so one of the things that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land mourns is how many have left and don't feel like they can come back. So I think they might say that the refuge is that so many, we've taken refuge by leaving. The starkness between when you're in Israel, you have electricity, you have water, you can flush your toilet. You go to Palestine, you have to collect water up on your roof. You can't flush your water, you can't flush your toilet because there's no sewer system, and you don't always have electricity because Israel won't run the lines to supply Palestine in that way. So to be able to formally give refuge is difficult because you really have to focus on, you don't even have enough water all the time for your own needs. So I'm sure they do. Hospitality is a huge thing in the culture, right? I mean, they gave us so much welcome and free hospitality, but I mean, it's just kind of off the cuff thinking. The disparities are huge. When you go through a checkpoint and suddenly Israel is, parts of Israel just beautiful and very modern city, but you get into Beit Jala and there are giant tanks up on the apartment roofs, right? Because they gotta every time it rains collect that water because that's how they use water. They gotta collect it. And when we were there, it hadn't rained in a long time, and so they were really. We were like, this is beautiful weather. And they're like, we need rain so bad. And luckily, the week after we left, it rained the whole time and got really, really nasty there. They were so happy because they have to replenish their water tanks.
In a simplistic way, is this a religious conflict, a Jew versus Muslim? Or is it a government? How is?
I don't think it's Jew versus Muslim. And when the conversations we heard often, especially in Palestine, again, because that's where we spend a lot of our time, Muslims and Christians get along very, very well. Very, very well. There's not the narrative that we often have here at all. They stressed again and again, and how that goes. And we witnessed that in the schools. The principals that we talk to, it's a very different setting.
I just wondered, what.
I would think that many would say that, Israel is trying to rebuild the Jewish state and reclaim that area for the Jews. I think that's probably too simplistic. It's been a conflicted area for way longer than I've been alive. It certainly is, the religions come from that area of the world, right? So, and the holy sites are shared by a lot of religion, right? And so, but that national state idea, I think that's prevalent from some. Right? That we have to be a more pure state. I think that's too simplistic. I don't know.
What legal right do they cite for coming in and taking someone's home or bulldozing someone's apartment building and things that happen to the Palestinians by the Israelis?
By international law, it's illegal. Since 1947. It's a very complicated situation for sure, and I'm not an expert. I just went there for 2 weeks, so yeah.
So what's the major roadblock for accountability?
Anyone? Well, the U.S. government does support Israel. There's lots of reasons why we probably support Israel. It's in our own best interests, right, for that region. I mean, Israel does not have nice neighbors at all. There are a lot of neighbors who would love to see Israel gone. And we don't want Israel gone for that very same reason, right? I mean, that's not a nice part of the world in terms of, right? So there are reasons why the U.S. supports Israel, good reasons, right? And oil's a part of that. I mean, so this is not a simplistic, easy thing to solve. So there are reasons why politically we support Israel and why it's really difficult to stand totally with the Palestinians on a government level, right? But those are hard truths, right? As us, we are Christian people, and we know that our brothers and sisters, you know, to be labeled a terrorist for throwing a stone and you're 12, I mean, that's an injustice, right? That we're called to reckon with as Christians.
How strongly is it promoted that the Israeli rights to that land is based on the historic biblical narrative of Exodus, where this God set aside this land for the people of Israel, so they have a divine right to this. Does that guide the whole situation to any extent at all?
I'm sure if you're a Jew, yes. And if you're a Hasidic Jew, probably absolutely.
I guess I follow the comment this person was saying over here. I think the existence of the state of Israel and the role of many of the Christian nations in helping that to happen is a result of the excessive guilt, not excessive, but authentic guilt that people felt after the Holocaust of World War II. It just is, it's a part of the dynamic where, you know, they, and so, you know, the granting of Israel a state, this kind of disrupted the lives of people who were there. You know, that was not taken into at all.
Right.
And I think we still live with it.
Yeah, I think you have a point for sure. And it probably was never imagined that Jews from the United States and all over the world would suddenly be moving to Israel, be given free housing and free places to live in Israel as Jewish settlers. I mean, I don't think anyone would have seen that coming. It is super complicated, right? I mean, I don't know that there is any, I don't know that there could be anybody who has a simple like origin story to it or a simple answer to it. How do we help any of this be solved? But certainly there is a call to justice in terms of what's being done to people on both sides, right? I don't think that some of the folks in Israel, the everyday person who gets up and goes to work, I mean, there are big signs when you come into Palestine that say, this is a dangerous place, turn back. That wasn't my experience at all. But you know, if you're an everyday ordinary citizen and that's what you see every day, that creates fear in you. So you're not gonna go there, right? So I mean, so there's harm being done there, right? That's creating a story. So there's harm being done there. There's harm being done on the part of the Palestinian people who are really being put in a place of suffering, right? There is not electricity and water lines being run to some of their places, and it's being shut off other times. So they're not being granted access. So there's harm being done on both sides, and it's awfully hard to come to the table. And nobody really wants to come, I mean, nobody on probably both sides, because there's so much anger and so much flare right now. And then you got Hamas working, and I don't know anything great about that. And we didn't go near the west, the Gaza Strip. That I would have felt unsafe. And they would not have put us in that position. What time is it? Oh, I need to stop. Any one last burning question? Okay, I've answered all their questions. It's back to you.
my favorite hymn. And sometimes I don't sing it, I just listen to you like you're singing me a lullaby, so thank you. Each week when we have a speaker, the offering goes to a cause or organization, the speaker's choice. And our offering tonight is going to Santa Maria. That's a Hispanic startup church that worships at Lutheran Memorial. So that our offering will go to that congregation tonight. Let us pray. I give thanks to you, Heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously protected me today. I ask you to forgive me all my sins, where I have done wrong, and graciously protect me tonight. Into your hands I commend myself, my body, my soul, and all that is mine. Let your holy angels be with me, so that the wicked foe may have no power over me. Amen. Almighty God and merciful God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, bless, preserve, and keep us this night and forevermore. Amen. Go in peace. Serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Hey.